All right, welcome. It is still the morning brief right here on Channels Television. And now we go into the main discussion for the day, which is the new minimum wage. We already know that the president had already approved 70,000 naira as minimum wage. The CUC and NLC already agreed. The organized labor met with the president. That's 1 week after the first meeting with the president, saying that, all right, we now agree to 70,000 naira. Of course, the NLC had already given reasons why they agreed to this. They say incentives that followed this decision is the reason they have agreed to it. So it means that 70,000 naira, that's about $43 for every, for the lowest, to give to any staff in the country. And we have joining us on the program right now, Shehu Onibide. He's the co-founder of BudgIT, is joining us via Zoom. And of course, Professor Ademola Abbas is Professor of Law and Global Affairs Analyst, is joining us from our Abuja studios to discuss this. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the morning brief. Let's begin with Shehu Onibide. He's a co-founder of BudgIT. The first question will be, how did this even begin in the first place? 70,000 naira as minimum wage. The reps have already said, be calm about this. House of Rep members have said, okay, for this reason, we have also cut our own by 50%. Is this enough?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think it's a great conversation. It's not enough in my own view, but it's a great start. Because when you look at minimum wage, you have to divide it in two levels. One, I understand that this is the minimum wage for a class of people. And also two, this is an household income. You have to look from an household perspective. So if you have two people in an household who have technically earned 140,000, you have to look at what would be an household income at 140,000 naira in a month. What can that buy? What can that do for a family of maybe of 5 or 6? So if you put it in that context, maybe especially you won't adjust that from a least expensive environment, maybe not like Lagos, maybe not you live in the island of Lagos or in the highbrow in Abuja. You also look at environments maybe in Oyo, in Zamfara, in Bauchi, in Gombe. You say, what can that do? So for you to say it's minimum, it looks like a great start. I've seen some states like Rivers, I think Edo are paying above that already. So in some sort of way, it's the minimum. It doesn't mean that every state or every establishment should be fixed to that. It just means that as a nation, this is where we have set the benchmark as minimum. So I feel it's a great start. It doesn't look great as I would want it to be. I was hoping we could get something within the 100 to 120,000 corridor because things are really that bad in terms of galloping levels of inflation. But the government has left a window that within 3 years, there's an opportunity to revise this current minimum wage. So we will look forward to that. And maybe by then there will be clear arguments about the fact that the current inflation situation that we have right now is worrisome. And whatever minimum wage or whatever increase that we're talking about now, it's just not enough at all.
Professor Ademola Abbas, as a professor of international law and how it's done globally, what are the implications for states that cannot afford to pay the 70,000 naira minimum wage? What is the impact, and what do you think will be done if they cannot afford to pay this amount?
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Well, it is a very interesting one because the federal government obviously has given a directive by approving 70,000 naira minimum wage for every worker. But it's entirely up to states now to comply to that, and they must do that in the interest of their own people, of the workers of the state. But we must understand the reality that not every state is equally endowed in Nigeria. There are some states that are already paying probably very close to 70,000 naira or even beyond 70,000 naira, per month. And there will be some states that are going to struggle a lot. We must understand also that there are many states that have not been even able to pay 30,000 naira minimum wage. Some of them have owed their workers several months down the road and so on and so forth. The question is, how are we going to be sure those states are going to be able to step up to be able to implement 70,000. In terms of implication, number one, if a state is not able to pay 70,000 naira, well, you risk, number one, losing a cohort of workers who might, there's going to be, I suspect there's going to be a lot of migration now from state to state, because at the end of the day, if your responsibilities are much greater than what 70,000 naira per month can address anyway, and a state you're working in is telling you they cannot pay up to that or something like that, or they're going to struggle, you have every incentive, every motivation to be able to move to another part of the country, another state where you think the cost of living is going to be lower and you are going to be able to earn what to be able to address that. I think what is also important is globally, we have to understand that it's not just about increasing wages. You can increase wages and inflation keeps rising. Look, for me, as an example, there's no big difference between 70,000 naira today and you are not able to buy a bag of rice with that. I'm paying 30,000 naira and you could buy a bag of rice actually for 11,000, 12,000, 15,000 naira. So I think what the government should do, one must say, what this government has done in making this increment from 30 to 70 is commendable, whether we like it or not. It's highly commendable. However, what the government now needs to do is to work very hard to bring down the inflation. That is when this particular wage is going to have decisive and desirable impact on the working masses of Nigeria.
Let me take this back to Sheung. And yes, we've been on this for quite some time now, this journey to 70,000. So while it represents what some say a progress, absolutely, more than times two of what was being paid before, I am concerned about the journey ahead, the coming days, weeks, and months. And I think Prof. Abbas also has spoken to that. So let's try to maybe look into the future and take a look at, maybe troubleshoot, do some scenario planning. What are those issues that we're bound to start dealing with as a result of this 70,000 naira minimum wage increase? So maybe think into the future and try to proffer solutions such that it doesn't meet us as a surprise.
Definitely, we are going to have a situation, and we start from the states. How many states will be able to afford to pay 70,000 naira minimum wage, and at the right scale? Because this is the minimum wage, so they're supposed to build the graduation up to like maybe level 16, level 18, and things like that. And the whole of state, you find that incremental elements to that does not just exist as it should. So in my own view, it's extremely clear that we will see a whole of states that will push back. There were states that just started implementing the 30,000 naira minimum wage recently. So definitely we would face that challenge as we go along the way, where some certain states will push back and say we can't just do this. And I think there's a huge windfall that states are experiencing now due to the increase in revenue or FAC allocation being distributed. But also there's also increased cost of capital project implementation. So you're going to have challenges there. So it's also a time to watch the fiscals for the state. The other thing is also to even look at the federal government itself. How there's a new adjustment into the budget that was proposed, and we're here to see full details about that. And there's a recurring component of that is nearly around 3 trillion naira. So it's also very important to see, and I know that a chunk of that is going to the minimum wage adjustment. So how the federal government also is able to keep to this without excessive borrowing. Without going back to what President Buhari regime did, which was to constantly get the CBN to provide overdraft for it and constantly just inflating the economy in the long run. So in a way, the ability of even the federal government to meet this, as well as other capital obligations, will also have to be watched, because we always assume that the federal government has an infinite bucket of money, but it doesn't have that. So we also have to even look at how the federal government responds to this. The private sector is also very critical. And I know that even in the previous minimum wage, a whole lot of institutions like private educational institutions, private security companies did not even comply with that previous minimum wage. So it's also very good to look at the range of how Nigerians react, especially those who are hiring formal workers. What does that look like? So it would be cool to maybe take a survey within a year to see what's the level of compliance with minimum wage. I think we need a lot of think tank and a lot of research and evidence in that environment. Yeah.
Well,
Well, so for me, I'd like us to look at what may have gone into bargaining on both sides. And we heard the NLC president say yesterday during our sister political program that, when they insisted on 250,000 naira, that the president said, look, if you allow me to increase the pump price of fuel, then I can give you 250,000 naira. But even at that, the pump price of fuel has been going up since May, when fuel subsidy was removed and the pump price of fuel went up to 500 naira per liter. As we speak in Lagos, there's 750,000 naira, 750 naira per liter being sold in some petrol stations. So you wonder how valid the reasoning of the president is on that one. And on the other hand, weeks ago, when the federal government announced the Reconstruction and Household Support Program, there was a component for labor, which is what the federal government calls provision for labor unions and civil society organizations. So has there been some compromise in labor agreeing to this amount?
Yeah, I mean, and I like that point. It's something big to watch to inflation, because let's not agree, we are in 34% inflation now. Food inflation is over 40%. So in some sort of way, if we are being honest with ourselves, there is no it doesn't mean like because you have more money in your pocket, it doesn't mean that it carries higher value. And that was what Prof was also trying to mention. Inflation will have to be significantly watched. And I think the labor, they missed an opportunity by benchmarking some of these increases to inflation. Letting the federal government also understand that it's not just about we want a 3% increase. It's not just about that. It's also to be very certain about if that increase is significant enough, to actually protect the dignity, or to even get people to even exist within this economy. So definitely, inflation is a trend to be watched. What we have right now is unhealthy. I don't think in my adult life, I was seeing a 34% inflation. And it seems that it's not slowing down, it's not tapering. As long as the exchange rate keeps losing value, as long as commodity prices keep increasing, as long as food insecurity, or what you would look at in terms of the insecurity in the central region and in the other components of the country.
Mr. Libinde, besides, pardon me if I may come in there, besides the point about inflation, I'm asking if you think that labor may have compromised in accepting 70,000 naira minimum wage, because in the household construction program announced weeks ago, the federal government included what it calls provision for labor unions and civil society organization. So what does that mean in the context of labor choosing to agree to 70,000 naira?
Number one, let's be honest. I wouldn't say compromise, because they say money for labor and civil society. I have not seen any money. We're part of the civil society. There is no framework that's come back to civil society to say, oh, this is how we want to provide support to government or to civil society. This is what we want to support them on. There is no clarity in that in any way. So I don't know what that means. I mean, federal government keeps making a lot of promises, different segments of the economy. I think the implementation of that has not been adequate. The other part is also to say that labor negotiated in a very weird way. In this situation, because they started with 1 million or 1.5 million. We knew that those things were not real. Even when it was at 250,000, it came across that it was unrealistic. So to you now come back and say, oh, we just accept 70,000. I mean, that sounded a bit weird to me, and say, because you don't want fuel price increases. But I mean, the fuel price is around 750 naira per liter at this point. So definitely it doesn't seem like anything is changing. I think I expected them to have come down a little bit to around 100, 120,000, 110,000. That sounded more reasonable. To jump from 250,000 and just accept 70,000 sounded like it was not like a proper negotiation framework there. But at the end of the day, people will look around and say 133% increase, one of the highest in recent times. It would be. We will take it. But let's also not agree that these are unprecedented times. This is an economy with a 34% inflation, with food inflation over 40%. It doesn't seem normal in a way. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Professor Abdemola Abbas, maybe you'd like to respond to that question also that's Mr. Sheon just answered to, and also would talk about the cost of living crisis, but answer to that first, then we can ask about the cost of living crisis.
Well, thank you very much. I think I sort of understand where you are coming from, and I also understand the response by Mr. Sheon to your question. What you wanted to find out was whether Labour compromised, obviously because for them to climb down from 250 to 70, and because the president mentioned, making provisions for Labour and so on and so forth, which probably you were hinting at there could have been. Look, let's be honest. Even an average Nigerian today suspects the labor movement, and sometimes quite rightly so, because we've come from a generation of labor leaders that have different strengths, that have different strategies, that have different competencies, that also have shown different mettle in terms of principles and finesse. We remember labor leaders who stood their grounds in the past and fought justifiably and credibly to the minds of all Nigerians, and they never compromised in the language you are talking about. We've also seen labor leaders who shifted grounds and, to the accusation, rightly or wrongly made by the public, that, so the famous or infamous brown envelopes changed hand and this and that. But look, the truth is, we cannot say categorically, we cannot equate a statement made by the president about making provisions for labor to justify an assertion or to, solidify an assumption that, so therefore, labor compromise. Whether labor compromise or not, to be honest, for me, is not what is significant here, because we cannot prove that, an allegation or a rumor. What we should focus on, and I'm happy that my colleague, Mr. Sheon, did refer to that, was that Labour began this negotiation in a very highfalutin manner by asking for 1 million naira, and then began to climb it down. Something tells me Labour knew at that point in time that it couldn't get probably more than 100,000 naira from the federal government. But look, I grew up in a market square. I watched my mom, in market. Whenever she was selling her wares, people would come, and sometimes she wanted to sell some for, in those days, maybe a piece of fish for 3 naira. She would start by saying, I'm going to sell this for 20 naira. You have to negotiate down. So there's nothing wrong in Labour pitching it very high, knowing fully well that if they didn't do that, the government will not probably meet them where they wanted it. Imagine if the Labour had come out to say, look, we want 250,000 naira from the start. Government could have pushed them to 40,000 naira or even to 35,000 naira. But by starting with 1 million naira, you began to think that, no, that's way too unrealistic. Let's think about 100,000 naira to 150,000 naira. So I think that is, for me, again, the president said many things. He said many things to different segments of the society. It's a negotiation strategy. The government could have meant to say, look, you are labor people, you're working very hard for the country, we have incentives for you. It doesn't mean that the president is trying to compromise them or to bribe them, or labor is opening itself to be being bribed or being compromised. It might simply mean that, look, you need to meet us midway. If you are negotiating with somebody, you put all the carrots on the table, because labor at the end of the day, they live in Nigeria, they are Nigerians like us. So it is normal that you have all these negotiation strategies from both sides. I wouldn't automatically assume that Labour compromise. And again, let me make it very clear. I am not vindicating Labour. I'm not saying for a fact that Labour did not compromise. But what I'm saying is that if they did, there is no proof of that on the table. For me, as far as I'm concerned, 70,000 naira probably was a little bit below what Labour could have asked for. But in the reality of Nigeria, given the fact that Nigerians as a people, we have lived on a borrowed life for a long time. And we keep forgetting that. Yes, I saw the analysis that when Jonathan was there, this was the price of oil in the market. This was the exchange rate of dollar and this and that. Many things have happened since then that have catapulted the global economies worldwide, all over the world, to where we are now. So we cannot begin to compare apple with oranges, to be honest with you. That is not going to make to me an intelligent analysis.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Abbas. I like the parts where you said the reality right now. So let's go to Mr. Onigbinde. You have the numbers as a co-founder of BudgIT. You know the reality right now, where we are as a nation currently, and how this is impacting food and every other thing around us as individuals and as citizens of Nigeria. The federal government has said, or president has said, that we'll review this every 3 years. How realistic is this? We know what the drama and everything around how they even got to 70,000 naira. How do you think reviewing this every 3 years will be sustainable?
I mean, you will see that in 3 years' time is it's an election year. So maybe, I mean, there might be a political undertone in that, because let's not lie to ourselves. I mean, it took more than 5 years, to been able to even to get to where we are right now. So in some sort of way, I don't know how easy that would be. And if that even happens, it might be to score some political points, ahead of the elections, just to make sure that maybe, makes a bit of workers happy, to maybe take a bit of votes from them. So I think that might be what it is. I don't see us even go through this process that took almost over a year, and now start back again. Because in my own view, when the subsidy was removed, the first thing that, before that even happened, before the president made that announcement, this minimum wage issue should have been on the table, because it was clear to everybody that the removal of fuel subsidy and the exchange rate parity mechanisms were going to carry inflationary elements. It was evident to everybody. So things around subsidy for minimum wage, things around transport systems, things around food inflation, the things that you are supposed to have tackled or have a clear strategy about. So in my own view, it sounded more like a political settlement than reality. I'm not too optimistic that there is a plan to just revise minimum wage in 3 years' time. If that exists, that might just be to score political points here.
Right. So I'll still come back to you on those who can pay or not pay, because we need to begin to call them out, particularly because you've seen their figures, you've seen what they're doing in terms of IGR, how much dependent they are on FAC and the rest. So we'll maybe come to states that can pay or cannot pay, and the ones still struggling with the previous minimum wage. But I want to quickly go to Professor Abbas on this. So on a wider scale, there's been a lot of discontent from Nigerians, different quarters, both on and off social media. And that spurred the House of Representatives yesterday to have a resolution on this. And eventually they decided to cut their salaries in half. And we did a calculation, and it came to just about 600 million naira for 6 months. That's how much they will be given towards, ending hunger. Now the new minimum wage has been announced. A couple of other measures, really, ingredients in making this soup, trying to placate Nigerians. For you, is this enough to back first the call for calm from the House of Representatives and to show proof that this government is really renewing the hope for Nigerians?
Thank you, Coyote, and nice to see you again. Look, let us separate the wheat from the chaff. Let us separate what I think is genuine effort by the federal government to address some challenges we have in Nigeria today. Either through things like student loan, now things like a minimum wage. We can argue about these things, about whether they are enough or they are not enough. But at least the federal government is making credible steps in those directions. I do not want to lump these measures with the rather cynical, gesture from the House of Representatives to say that, well, they wanted to, slash their salaries by 6 months. I say cynical because, number one, I'm actually beating back that the first time the House of Rep has told Nigerians how much they were earning in salary was when it came to the question of there's going to be a national protest. We want to do something. Oh, we earn 500,000 naira. No, it's 600,000 naira per month we earn. Let us forgo that by 6 months. Half of it by 6 months to be able to help Nigerians, or as the honorable member said yesterday, to be able to allow Nigerians to feed and stuff like that. I mean, this is, I'm sorry to say, a little, too much a gesture towards tokenism. We don't need tokenism from the National Assembly. And I think that is part of the problem, Coyote and the rest of the crew. And that is the fact that the federal government needs to understand that it continues to call on Nigerians to make sacrifices to ensure that all the short-term and long-term policies and plans the government is trying to put in place, quite understandably, to address the challenges we have in the country, bear fruit. The government, federal, must ensure that Nigerians, ordinary Nigerians, do not suffer disproportionately to the members of the government or government officials living as if we are still in 1999 or in those good old days. No, that is the point. I would have wanted a National Assembly and House of Rep or the Senate that would be far more proactive, far more empathic, far more sensitive to the sufferings of the people. But when you hear statements coming from the leadership, sometimes of the Senate and the leadership of House of Reps and the rank and file, you actually worry about whether they actually understand what is going on and whether they think those who will elect them in that positions can take them as very serious in trying to discharge the mandate of the people. So, I mean, for those who care, maybe, cutting back their salaries or in half to feed Nigerians for 6 months might be something that somebody wants to remark. As far as I'm concerned, it's a rather cynical gesture. What the National Assembly needs to do is to sit down and devise means and credible ways of taking Nigeria out of the present economic logjam it found itself. And I'm not saying this is the creation of this particular government, no. And it's accumulation of several years of misgovernance, mismanagement, and lack of prioritizing what we should have prioritized. It's several years and decades, I think, of living on borrowed life. Because as Nigerians, we have lived on borrowed life for a long. We have punched above our weight. We have lived. We've lived as if there will be no tomorrow. But now we want to start now addressing all those things. Obviously, we can't do that overnight, and that is why we have to cut the government some slack. And we have to watch what the government is. The government is just about a year in power. We are hoping that they're going to continue the pace. I mean, just as my colleague said earlier on, in terms of reviewing this thing every 3 years, instead of 5 years, that's commendable. And given the record that the government is kind of the temerity the current government has shown in terms of at least listening and responding and having meetings, I'm mildly optimistic that they may be able to keep to that 3 years without obviously oversighting what the gentleman said in terms of this might be a political overtone. So I don't really think that the gesture from House of Representatives is anything to celebrate. I'm sorry. I think they need to do more. The Senate needs to do more.
Right.
They must understand they are people representatives, and that is very, very important.
Well, Mr. Onibide, for Prof, he thinks that it's cynical and they need to do more, even for the Senate. For you, how do you receive it? Because there's salaries, there's allowances, and there are other areas people are saying, how about you cut costs in these areas as well? So what will it be for you, Mr. Onibide?
I also don't accept it. I don't think it's reasonable enough to say, our salary by 50%. We know the devil is in the allowances. I mean, people tell us that an House of Rep member earns around 12 to 15 million naira now. Senator is, monthly. All the allowances and bonuses and all the payments are within that bracket. A senator is a little bit above 15 million naira. So, that's what we hear. People say, and if you look at what the RMAFC asks them to earn, that is not even up to them. I'm even asking, what powers do you have the right to do that? You don't fix your salaries. Your salaries are fixed by a government agency. So how do you wake up one morning without the approval of the government agencies to say we're going to get 50% of our salary? It just sounds more like a Greek gift. It doesn't sound like something that I don't think was well thought out. If the National Assembly want to have a big conversation, let's look at the whole size of the budget. The National Assembly will significantly increase its budget from around 230 billion to 547 billion. Added the whole log of projects, its hospitals, its libraries, and different items. Apart from that, there's 100 billion naira that was added as constituency project. Apart from that, they added 2.2 trillion naira worth of projects as constituency projects to the budget. Most of them are micro projects that are within their constituency. And we know this, that a lot of the implementation of these projects, they get to nominate, some of the implementers of this project. They put their twist MDAs to get some of these projects to happen. These are well-known facts, in a way. So and we have a lot of evidence in budget in terms of tracking constituency projects to see that implementation has either been suboptimal, and most times are only just able to advance the political interest of National Assembly members. Yeah, if National Assembly members want to do things right, let them tighten the capital side of the project. Yeah. That is where the problems significantly are. And let them also reduce the budget that goes into the National Assembly. Even those things are not happening at the macro level. For me, it's not
Okay,
significant.
Mr. Onigbinde, let's quickly manage our time because we'd like you to walk us through which states can pay and which states cannot pay, knowing that there's consequential adjustment, and when this goes to the National Assembly, it becomes an act of parliament that states are bound to pay. But we all know what the realities are in that mix, even from 18,000 naira. But speak to this while you're doing that as well. The Niger state government is saying, look, this state does not rely on FAC to finance its projects or move the state forward. The state governor says categorically, I do not need FAC in Niger state. So based on what you have, the figures that you have of states that are dependent on FAC, state of the states, walk us through maybe a few states that can pay 70,000 naira and states that cannot, so we know which states to keep our eyes on as implementation commences.
First we'll start with the Niger state government. That's a funny or a clownish statement. There is no subsisting facts. And we can look at those states. Ability of a state to pay minimum wage is not just about money that you receive. You also look at your size of existing operational costs. And if you look at it in terms of what we have observed, we don't have more than 12 states that will be able to pay the minimum wage if the scale is properly applied. I use the word if the scale is properly applied because someone that can be at the level 14 officer and current 140,000 within the current wage structure, and you add 20 or 30,000 naira to that, that doesn't mean that you have applied minimum wage the way it should be. But if you are going to, because if you're doubling if you're doing 1.3% growth, which means technically you are going to at least double your entire wage structure. And if you put that forward, a whole lot of states, so apart from the oil producing states of the rivers, Akwa Ibom, and not even all of them, Edo, which have all this fiscal space, states like Bayelsa, Delta might even struggle to pay that minimum wage, considering the size of their operational cost right now that some of us even don't understand. If you come into the southwest, yes, Lagos State will have capacity to do that well. Ogun should have capacity to do that well. Or you might struggle a little bit. He has a huge, personnel cost already. So if you don't see 70,000 with implementation, I won't be surprised. The same thing with Osun. Ondo should be able to pay that minimum wage, considering it gets extra money from derivation. And Ekiti might even struggle to pay 70,000 minimum wage too. Let's be realistic. Because some of these states also do not have significant jumps in their IGR. Most of the states in the north have low personnel costs relative to states in the south, and maybe the social service framework there is not as huge. So you might say, but most of them are also not paid the 30,000, only pay 30,000 or near amount about that. So I don't think a lot of them will also be able to pay that. And let's not forget that capital expenditures have also risen. So if it costs you maybe 100 million naira to build a road today, it might cost you
Thank you very much, Mr.
Onigbinde.
Mr. Abbas, I'm just going to give you 5 seconds to finish this. Just in seconds, please, Mr. Abbas. Your final words. Professor Abbas.
Well, thank you very much. Look, I think what is important for us to always remember is that at the end of the day, the masses they bear the brunt of some of these policies. And they depend on the national parliament, first and foremost, because they are the elected representatives of the people. And the national parliament will have to rise to the challenge to be able to come to people's aid. And also, let us don't forget of the fact that
all right,
there is deficit of trust in government, and government can shore up that by making sure that they embark on people-centric policies that will, at the end of the day, help people. I think that is, and finally we have to remember that we only have one country. We don't have another country to go. So we all have to work together to make sure this country survives. That is our ultimate.
Thank you very much. That's a good place to end it. Professor Ademola Abbas is a professor of international law and global affairs analyst. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. And we had Seun Onigbinde, co-founder BudgIT. Thanks a lot for your time on the morning brief. I guess we'll definitely be finding a balance in all of this as we move ahead. Thanks a lot again.